Alrighty, welcome back to Shut Up and Ball. I am Aaron Chow, accompanied by my co-host, John Harris, as always. And we're back to react to week 11, not react, sorry. Jumping the gun there. It hasn't even happened, which is not me from the future at all. But we're here to share our picks / bets, once again, bets are not with real money, against the spread for week 11 of the NFL. Just a quick side note, too, before I update the standings and such. Do apologize for any Arizona / Atlanta fans that were maybe, because I don't think we went over that game. I think, honestly, if I remember correctly, I accidentally skipped over that. So that was on
our reactions.
Yeah, I don't remember us talking about it, period.
If they're an Atlanta fan, they should be happy because it would have just been another week of me talking about Arthur Smith getting fired. Like losing to the Cardinals with Kyler Murray finally back from an ACL, and like you just get shredded by Trey McBride. Like, come on.
Yeah, so there wasn't going to be any crazy analysis. That was probably, John really probably just summed it up, basically.
Yeah.
So it's just, I do apologize. That was on me. Me as the, I was it's the main host, and I usually kind of try to drive the ship here, and I missed the turn. I missed the gas station. That's okay.
I forgot about it too. Maybe it's just I'm so used to talking about Arthur Smith every week that I just forgot.
Yeah. So if anything, we just can't say that we gave us a break, gave everyone a break too from us ranting about Arthur Smith. Although deservedly so, the rants are warranted. But nonetheless, time to update y'all on the standings. What happened last week? So needed a big week last week, and I finally had a good one money wise. Went plus 1,200. Thank you, Detroit. I was sweating that one out, like I mentioned last week. And obviously, I had a couple other ones. Dallas, of course, pulled through, but that's no shocker against the Giants. So I was plus 1,200. In terms of money, you were minus 160. Unfortunately, the Jets really were the main one that couldn't come through for you in terms of your big bets. Because otherwise, and Cincy, you did put 200 on Cincinnati, so that was a potential swing there. But and then record wise though, that one's even a tough one. Like in regards to me trying to make a comeback. I'm 13 games behind, so I only got one game on you last week. You went 8-6, I went 9-5. So as we both were kind of talking beforehand, like it's going to be tough. It would be easier, more realistic for me to make a comeback into gambling because that can swing depending on where you put your money, as opposed to the spreads. Like I have to have John's help in regards to making it back record wise. Like John kind of has to shit the bed a little bit too for that to happen. So we'll see.
Also, I mean, if we really follow our hearts, like you have to hope that I disagree with you, which as we've seen, like we kind of have somewhat similar theories on a lot of the games. Like at most we have like 6-7 disagreements, and so to make the comeback, that's a tough part because you need all the disagreements to go your way on the records. So.
Yeah, I mean, last week, for example, like that's literally, I just had one went my way. Overall, I mean, you had a couple. You had Arizona, Minnesota. I had Houston and San Francisco. So like those were just, and Detroit. Sorry, that's what Detroit. I meant Detroit was a big one. So we'll see if I can continue to somehow mount a comeback. John already knows where I put my money this week. I'm just going to tell everyone it's a very similar strategy to last week because it worked. So we'll see if it works for me. And if I can continue to make this climb back, or at least make it respectable. I want to make it respectable. So we'll see if I can do so going forward, or if John will just run away with this in terms of record and money. But nonetheless, let us dive into it. Week 11. Let's start, obviously, with Thursday night. And we finally got a good one. It should be. I'm going to knock on wood. But nonetheless, it is a divisional battle and a really good one nonetheless. It is the Baltimore Ravens at home at Baltimore. They are favored by 3.5, hosting the Cincinnati Bengals. Both teams coming off tough losses. Obviously, Cincinnati lost to Houston, and Baltimore really should have won that game. Their game, they were in control of most of it against the Browns. Browns come back and win, and obviously we'll talk about them here soon because they have news there too. But in regards to this one, what are your thoughts here, John? Who are you picking and for how much?
I'm going to go with Cincinnati. I'm going to put the standard 100 here. I mean, the last time they played, I believe Baltimore won, but that was also in like the mix of the early part of the season, I'm pretty sure, when Cincinnati was not doing very well. So, the thing I'm about to say is probably the same thing I said at the time, which is historically, Joe Burrow and the offense has done really well against Baltimore's secondary. And yes, they do have some different pieces, compared to previous years. And like Kyle Hamilton is, much improved compared to his rookie season. But overall, I think Cincinnati, they've been thriving. Obviously, they did lose this past week, but it was to the red hot Texans. Baltimore brought down to earth as well. And I think that both teams kind of coming off a loss, so similar motivations there. But ultimately, I just think that the Bengals needed a little bit more. They're a lot further behind in terms of the playoff race. And I think that, as the old saying goes, it's tough to beat a team twice. So I'm taking Cincinnati, going to put 100 on it.
Yeah, I mean, even the game you mentioned earlier this season, it was 27-24, relatively close game. And yeah, like you alluded to, Cincinnati has gotten better. Obviously, Burrow's gone healthy. That's been a big part of this. So I'm going with you. I think Cincinnati keeps this close. We've seen them do it in recent years. It does suck. No T. Higgins. I think for me, I'm threading the needle. That's why I'm only putting 25 on Cincinnati. I think this is going to be a close game. I wouldn't be shocked if Baltimore wins by 3 again. But I also wouldn't be shocked if Cincinnati wins because maybe they go back and look and see what the Browns did last week, at least passing wise, see how they can take advantage of Baltimore's secondary because that was a little bit of a shocker last week. Because for the most part, Baltimore's defense, we mentioned it going into last week, it was a top 2 defense going into the week. And hey, it's the NFL. Teams are great. So, it can happen. You can get scored on. But and then it's very interesting to see how Cincinnati's defense guards Baltimore in the run game. Mentioned last week, it seemed like Houston found a lot of success on the edges against the Cincinnati defense, especially since Trey Hendrickson got banged up. I'm not sure his status going into this game, so that could be a huge exploit that the Ravens take care of. But nonetheless, I'm going with the Bengals. It's just tough divisional game. And yeah, like you mentioned, desperation because Baltimore is sitting a little bit prettier than the Bengals at 7-3. They're clearly at the top of the division, while the Bengals are at 5-4. And like we mentioned earlier in the year, like they don't have much room for error at this point because of their early season struggles. So we'll see if they can overcome that or Baltimore can still hold control atop the AFC North going forward. But let's stay in the AFC North when we go to the Sunday games. Ironically, as we're going to Cleveland, where the Browns will be without Deshaun Watson, not just for this game, for the rest of the year, because it was announced today, in case you missed it. Deshaun Watson out for the rest of the season, shoulder injury, that shoulder that's been kind of lingering this whole year. It seems like they finally decided to shut him down, which is a shame because he had a great week last week, so it seemed like they were on the right path. But nonetheless, and if I remember correctly, it's going to be Dorian Thompson-Robinson that they've named the starter here. So you can see why it's only a half-point spread. Vegas is very unsure because, as I just mentioned, Cleveland still a top 2 defense, or at least going to last week, maybe a little bit hurt by last week, but nonetheless, we know they're talented. But they go up against the Steelers, and we all know about the Steelers, how they've managed to somehow get to 6-3 with these close games and such. So this will be an interesting one, nonetheless. So who do you have here, John, between the Browns, who once again favored by half a point, over the Steelers?
I don't feel confident either way, to be honest. Like, it's in Cleveland. I think that Cleveland's defense could certainly mess up the Pittsburgh offense, but I think the same can be said on the other side with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. If Deshaun was playing, obviously the spread's going to be a little bit bigger, and I would feel far more confident in Cleveland because we just saw Deshaun was able to have a very resilient performance against a really tough defense in Baltimore. So, if that was the case, I think that he could, probably get it done against Pittsburgh. But, you got a third string quarterback who's now the starter because, PJ Walker didn't light the world up. But the last time we saw DTR, the guy threw 3 picks. I don't know the status of the Cleveland offensive line because I'm pretty sure last week they were missing 2 of their starting tackles. Well, the 2 starting tackles. So I don't know if those guys are going to be back. There's just a lot of question marks I have about Cleveland. So I'm going with Pittsburgh, but I'm only going to put 10 because I don't think that this week is going to be one where Jaylen Warren and Najee are going to be able to run successfully like they did last week. And without that, I worry about, we've said all season, I worry about how they're going to consistently get points. So just in general, I feel like this is a very low-scoring game. I think it's a close game, and for that, considering I just don't really feel confident either way, I'm going the Steelers, but I'm only putting the minimum of 10.
Right with you. I'm going with Pittsburgh. I'm going 25 because, yeah, like you mentioned, it's just a lot of unknown variables here. Yeah, in regards to Dorian Thompson-Robinson, we know Pittsburgh their defense does feast off turnovers, so that could be key. But then on the flip side, though, like we mentioned a million times, we've been very unimpressed, as many, even in Pittsburgh, have been with their offense. But like we mentioned, they've been really good at not turning the ball over. And like you said, that could be key in a game that, very likely could be like a 12-13 type game. Just get that vibe. So who knows what happens there. So yeah, I'm also playing it cautious with only going to Steelers for 25, while John's even being more cautious and going with the minimum bet of 10 on Pittsburgh to basically cover and win because it's only half a point. So basically pick them at that point. So unless they tie, I guess. So if they tie, then it still works out for us. And we've seen crazier things, or not even crazy things. We've just seen ties before. So, and we haven't had one this year. Just saying. So I'm knocking on wood because no one likes ties. But let's move on over to another game on Sunday. This is the biggest spread of the weekend, at least as of right now on Wednesday. Could change. But it is the Miami Dolphins at Miami. They are favored by 12.5 points, hosting the red-hot Las Vegas Raiders, 2-0 with Antonio Pierce. But I think so. If I remember correctly, it's their first time. They're going to be going away to play another team under him. So it'll be interesting to see, if maybe how they look on the road. Nonetheless, basically, do you think the Dolphins will cover, John, or do you think the Raiders keep it close?
I think the Dolphins will cover. I think that it's just tough to cover Miami and the weapons they have. A week for Jalen Waddle to potentially get healthy, coming off the bye because he's been in and out. Obviously, Tyreek Hill's been doing his thing. And just overall, I feel like you give the Dolphins a week to prepare for you. It's going to be tough sledding. So I'm picking Miami by nature of the spread being 12.5 and the point allocation I had elsewhere. I'm only putting 50. It's not a lack of confidence in them. It's that I just kind of wanted to go big on a handful of other games. And the 12.5, it's when you get to those big, like you got to win by multiple scores, then there's room for backdoor covers, right? And so for that, I'm only going to 50, but I do think that Miami should win this one pretty easily.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. While the winning streak for the Raiders has been, great to see for them, and the turnaround, this is a whole different animal they're facing, especially for their defense. As good as Max Crosby is against Miami, and their offense, you're gonna need a lot more than just Max Crosby making plays, and everyone else has done solid. But we've mentioned before, like lack of another playmaker in the secondary. And I know someone's gonna say, well, they got Marcus Peters, but it's old Marcus Peters, and it just feels like there's gonna be a moment where he's gonna take the cheese and Miami's going to want him to, set it up so he does take the cheese and have, Tyreek or someone else, burn him on or do something, So, yeah, and they could get Devon Achane back. Who knows? But regardless, Mostert's still there, so the run game will be viable. And on the flip side, like very quietly too, once again, like Vegas's offense hasn't been that much better. Now, granted, yes, they've been getting the ball into their playmakers' hands more often, which, kudos to them, I guess, for that. But, that wasn't exactly rocket science in terms of that ideology. But Miami's defense gotten better as of recent, obviously gotten healthier now with Ramsey back. Hopefully they get Xavier Howard back too. So I think that will make life tough for them. So I'm a little bit more confident in the Dolphins. Also, I'm a little bit desperate here too. So I'm putting 150 on Miami to cover that big spread. So hopefully they do. But like you mentioned, back doors are always open, especially in the NFL. So that could be scary in terms of the Raiders covering. So we'll see what happened. Sorry, let me check. Are the Raiders technically a winning team? Because I know there's that whole stat line there. They're 5-5.
500, yeah.
So I don't know if that counts in terms of that statistic with it. So who knows, if that'll count for the Dolphins. But nonetheless, there's that. We're both in agreement thus far. We'll see if we can keep it going. Let's go to the NFC North, my division, where the Detroit Lions are at home, favored by 7.5 points, hosting the Chicago Bears. The interesting asterisk here is Bears could very likely get back Justin Fields this game. Once again, we're recording on Wednesday, so we don't have full clarity if he will be back for this one. So it does make it tough to pick. Nonetheless, John, who do you have here and for how much?
In this one, I am going to go with Detroit. I think they are the significantly better team, although Justin Fields is going to be back. And we have seen in the past, like I think even last year there was a game, maybe it was 2 years ago, where Justin Fields like lit up the Lions. And I do think that that's potentially capable of happening because, we saw the Lions secondary last week, not the greatest. I just don't see a world in which this Chicago Bears defense is going to be able to slow down the Lions whatsoever. And with Fields being a little bit rusty, the offensive line still, not being the greatest. Not that he has to necessarily build chemistry, but you just got to get back in that groove. I feel like Detroit's going to pull away, and I feel very confident of this. So I'm going 300 on the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm in agreement, though, so not going to be a huge swing one, just in terms of overall. But I'm going with Detroit for 100. Like you alluded to, like we've mentioned, Chicago's defense, hey, they got some good, Brandon Montez, well, hopefully he can be a piece they can build off of. We'll see what happens with Jalen Johnson. But they have some talent, but still no overwhelming superstar that you worry about that could wreck the Lions game. And as I've mentioned too, Lions, I feel like every week I wax poetically about them. I'm going to do it again. Yeah, their offensive line, still one of the best in the league. We saw it last week. I think they're going to have similar success, especially at home, in regards to just doing what they want in the run game. And then, that leads to just easier success in the pass game for Jared Goff and company. And on the flip side, even if it is Justin Fields, if there is one thing Detroit is pretty good at on defense, it is slowing down the run game. And like you mentioned, there could be some lack of continuity and a slow start for the Bears passing offense too. Especially if Justin Fields is back there, because who knows how many reps he's gotten recently in practice, and just it's hard to be away from live action, playing that spot for so long and being thrusted back into it in the middle of the season. So I'm going Detroit for 100. John is putting down 300 on the Lions to cover that 7.5 points. So we'll see if they can convert for him, and also for me, because I put 100, but mostly for John, since you put the big money there. But let us go over to your division, where we got a matchup here between the two teams that are, let's just say, at the bottom part of your division, and it is the Washington Commanders. They are at home at Washington, favored by 9.5 points, hosting the New York Giants. Of course, it will be Tommy DeVito to start again for them. So who do you have here, John, and for how much?
Well, I'll just say this. Because the line is 9.5, I do not feel confident either way. I don't think the Giants are a good team by any means. That said, Washington's defense is also very bad, and so who knows what happens with the Giants offense, right? Like maybe Saquon can bust some big runs, maybe they can just make some plays happen, and this is one of the easier games Tommy DeVito is going to have on the year. So if there's any point that he could maybe find it could be this one, because the lack of pressure that they're probably going to be able to get, especially on the edges, is going to be noticeable without Montez Sweat and Chase Young. We've already been over that. And the secondary, I mean, how many times do we have to talk about all the elite receivers that just had crazy days against this defense? Obviously, the Giants don't have an elite receiver, but the fact that those guys are just able to shred them means that clearly there's something wrong on that defensive side of the ball. So, yeah, I'm going with Washington just because I do think they are the better team, and I like the stuff they've been doing on offense. That said, I feel like that Giants defense is somewhat underrated. Like, I say that because when the Cowboys did what they did last week, everybody's like, oh, well, it was against the Giants. And yeah, the Giants are bad, but let's not act like the Giants defense hasn't had some really good moments on the year. Like that Bills game, for example, in primetime, where they held them to 14 points. Obviously, Buffalo's not doing quite that well, during this recent stretch, but still a notable result. So I'm taking Washington, but I'm putting 10 on it because I don't know either way. I don't feel like the gap between these teams is really as big as the spread makes it out to be.
Yeah, I'm in agreement in regards to it's a tough game, should be a close game. I'm going the other way in regards to the pick. I'm going with the Giants. I'm also going only for the minimum 10 because...
So this game has no impact on our scores.
Really no impact. I mean, it's really just I'm going on the mindset that you kind of mentioned, where like this has to be the game where you got to show something here, Giants and Tommy DeVito.
Right.
Like if we saw last week, we mentioned it, in the reactions where there's that fourth down where they just didn't trust him at all. They just ran the ball. So I would assume this would be like, hey, like this is it. Like let him air it out a little bit. You got to, because that's been the main, as you mentioned, the main weakness of the Washington defense. That they can be had there. And then on the flip side, another reason why I'm going with the Giants is, like you mentioned, the Buffalo game, and I mentioned this last week, Washington is a bit one-dimensional. It is very heavy on, the drop-back pass game. And like you mentioned, I am in agreement that the Giants defense has been underrated, or is underrated for the most part. And I think they'll keep them in this game. I'm threading the needle a bit. I do think Washington will pull away, but I think this is going to be an ugly one. Probably maybe like a 20-13 or 17-10 type game. That's what I'm also kind of hoping. So, but like you mentioned, it's not a huge loss in terms of money for either of us because we're both going the minimum, just opposite ways. So, while it is our first disagreement, it is likely not going to be very impactful unless, who knows, maybe if one of us wins it in the year by 20 points, then I'll look back at this one and shake my fist at it. But who knows? So. We'll see what happens there between those two, as those two teams, Giants definitely probably heading towards a rebuild or reload of some sort, while Washington finding out what they got before they potentially shuffle some things around personnel wise, especially possibly in regards to the coaching department. But nonetheless, let's keep the train moving. Let's go to the AFC, going to the AFC South, where the Jaguars are at home, fresh off that loss to the Niners. They are favored by 6.5 points over the Titans, who just lost to Tampa Bay last week. So both teams coming off a loss. Tennessee possibly feeling the heat of Houston and their momentum right behind them, because Houston's literally only a game behind Jacksonville. So who do you have here, John, and for how much?
I'm going to go with the Jags. The Jags, I think, match up pretty well against Tennessee. The only thing that scares me here is that, the Jags defense last week, they're coming off a real tough performance. Obviously, Tennessee is no San Francisco, so I don't necessarily think that this is a game in which, Jacksonville's going to be worried at all. But if Derrick Henry had a terrible week last week, I think he could be motivated to bounce back. We saw last week that McCaffrey was able to do whatever he wants, so maybe there's something there that the Jags are struggling a little bit against the run right now. I don't know. Overall, like I said earlier about the some of these other games like the Miami game, I am confident in Jacksonville. That said, I've hoarded a lot of my points onto 4 separate games, and this is not one of them. And so for that reason, it was one of the ones that was left over, and I threw 10 on there. If I had points overall and I was just putting whatever I truly wanted, I'd probably put the standard 100 here because I do think that Jacksonville should win. But yeah, I don't know. The matchup does feel weird. It feels like a trap game almost. Like that gets talked about a lot in college, not as much in the NFL, but in college, there's kind of those games where it just feels off for some reason. Like, man, I could maybe see this being competitive. That's what this one kind of feels like right now.
We'll see what happens, and hopefully not, because I'm putting 90 on Jacksonville. I'm a little bit more confident. I just still got to see more from Tennessee's offense. We mentioned, Levis still going through he's young, obviously first year, so he's going through a bit of his learning curve. And like we mentioned last week too, like not much talent on Tennessee's offense that really scares me anyway. That could help them out. I know there's still Derrick Henry there, but their line has been a mess, and they haven't really been able to get the run game going consistently. And then on the flip side, their secondaries, had issues, as we've seen. Even Baker Mayfield in the game got the best of them. So I think this is a bit get right game for the Jaguars, especially for their passing offense, because we kind of saw last week when they couldn't get ETN going, that issues kind of came about. But I think they'll find balance this week against a lesser Tennessee team, and I'm sure they'll get opportunities, via turnovers or good field position, just because Tennessee's offense I expect them to struggle against Jacksonville. But hopefully it's not a trap game, like you mentioned. But yeah, that is very real. Look at Cincinnati, Baltimore. It's very likely those two teams were kind of sleeping at the wheel last week. Looking forward to the Thursday game this week, between the two. and they both can't pay the price. But yeah, this, like you mentioned, this very well, and to add on to that though, this very well could be also like one of those where one loss turns to two because they got beat real bad by San Francisco, and it's sometimes hard to pick yourself up off the mat again. But we'll see what happens if Jacksonville can bounce back or if Tennessee can pull off the upset here with Will Levis at the helm. But let us go to your game where your Dallas Cowboys are favored by 10.5. So not the 17 that they were last week, a little bit less.
Yeah.
Playing a little bit better opponent, but not that much better as they are going up against the Carolina Panthers at Carolina. They are the underdog. So Dallas favored by 10.5 over Carolina in Carolina. Basically, John, do you think your Cowboys will cover or not?
Yeah, I think they will. The Panthers, although I think matchup-wise, match up a little bit better than the Giants do. Like we've seen, what Dallas able to do the Giants twice now. Like it's just real rough sledding for them. Although I think Bryce Young and that offense should be a little bit more successful, I don't envision it being that much different. Like I still think this is a game in which Dallas can put up over 30 points. I still think this is a game in which the Carolina offense is going to struggle to score and is maybe going to hover around 10, 14 at most, maybe 17 or more if there's like garbage time for a lot of the fourth quarter. But I really think that Dallas is going to have another dominating performance. So I'm putting 300 on them. This is, like I said, I've hoarded a lot of my points. I've mentioned 300 on Detroit, 300 on Dallas. And yeah, I feel confident my boys, especially considering like the hot streak they're on right now. Like since that Niners game, that if you're gonna get blown out like that, the way you want to respond is, all right, like we haven't been getting CeeDee Lamb the ball. Boom, he's going crazy since then. All right, Dak, he had a terrible game. He's been going crazy since then. Like sure, they lost to the Eagles, but the things that were like the clear problems in the Niners game, they have for the most part fixed. And so yeah, Dallas is they're looking really strong right now. So I'm going with the Cowboys for 300.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I'm actually going more. This is for our spoiler alert. This is my biggest bet of the week, and I think maybe of the season. Maybe probably not. I'm putting 750 on Dallas. We've mentioned Carolina's offensive line is still a mess. They don't have many weapons that scare you. Dallas so good at crowding line of scrimmage, creating chaos there with their pass rush in different ways. And especially, hey, they like to play man a lot. And once again, like outside of Adam Thielen, like we've mentioned before, who really scares you in Carolina? Answer, nobody. Sorry to those other guys, but most of them are young and such. So, yeah, that's no pun intended to Bryce Young. But, yeah, I just feel like it's going to be a rough day in the office for him. And on the flip side, while we've applauded Carolina's defense knowing that it has talent, they're still young and they've been had multiple times, their defense. So yeah, I expect Dallas to do their usual where they just dominate, the floodgates open at some point or some quarter, kind of I'll sometimes like the Chiefs would offensively, or some of these great teams where they just blow this game wide open in an instant and it's game over, especially if you're a lesser talented team. So we are both in agreement.
And I would say too, real quick, the one thing that I do think that's really scary about this matchup, if you're a Panthers fan, is Dallas beats up on bad teams, but the way that they really do it is when you have a bad offensive line, because this defensive line is like they have the most pressures in the NFL. And I saw some thread on Twitter earlier today where Kurt Warner was talking about stuff and responding to people about the Panthers and Bryce Young, and people are starting to call him bust and all that. And he was just giving his take, and he was talking about like the Panthers' pass protection has been poor. And his one critique of Bryce Young is not necessarily that he's making bad decisions and throws and all that. It's that his technique is just a little slow right now. Like there's the timing of the NFL where, two separate things. Number one, we saw this too with Tua, right? There was that clip of Fitzpatrick talking to Tua about it, and he said, "Listen, this isn't like Alabama. Like you can't wait for the guys to get open like they did in college. The NFL, the open in the NFL is a lot smaller than you think it is, right? And you have to make that throw." And Kurt Warner said the same thing about Bryce Young. He said he's waiting for guys to get Alabama open when they're NFL open, and it's like you got to make the throw. They're not going to get Alabama open unless they're maybe Thielen. So there's that, and he was also, it's not like that's happening all the time. He was saying that like there's a lack of getting open in general. So, but then the big one that I'm really thinking too is he was saying that sometimes Bryce Young, when he's going through his footwork, is not quite ready to make the throw with his body when he needs to be. So like he's got to go through the footwork faster and get to a position where he is ready to instantly like let it go. If somebody's in his face. And that's the part that worries me for Carolina, is that Dallas is really good at getting in your face.
Yeah. So we'll see how Bryce Young deals with that and if he can, kind of overcome that issue this week, but highly unlikely since chips are kind of stacked against him. Like we've mentioned, it was just in regards to roster construction wise at this time. And it happens, like we mentioned in the reactions. And like they mentioned on the broadcast last Thursday night, it's going to take time. There's a reason. I know it wasn't technically their pick, but they traded a bunch of assets, and Carolina's in a rebuild, so it's obvious why they're struggling on both sides of the ball. So we'll see, though, if they can find some hope going forward and some things to build off, or if Dallas will just absolutely crush them like a grape, like we're both expecting and betting like they will. So 10.5 points is what Dallas has to cover. Once again, John betting 300. I'm going 750 on the Cowboys to cover that spread. So we did your game. Let's go over to my game, where the LA Chargers are the favorites, favored by 2.5 points, going to Green Bay to play the Packers. Obviously, Packers underdog there. So, John, how do you see this one playing out, and who do you have for how much?
Another game where I'm going big. I am taking the Chargers for 300. My thought process here is, last week, Green Bay showed that you can run all over him. I think Austin Eckler could finally maybe have like the performance that at least his fantasy owners have been waiting for, where he can have a big day. But also, I mean, Justin Herbert and this offense have just been lighting it up. You got Keenan Allen. I think he's going to play. He didn't practice today, but I'm still expecting him to play. And I don't really necessarily believe in y'all's secondary to adjust to Keenan. Like he's been on a heater. I know that Jair is there. Is he healthy, by the way? Because I don't think he played last week.
He didn't play last week, and as of right now, he has not practiced. So I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't play this week.
Yeah, so I mean that makes it life even easier, because then you don't have the potential of Jair swapping onto you if you start getting hot, or covering you whenever he goes on the outside, stuff like that. So I don't know. I feel pretty confident here that the Chargers are going to be able to do their thing, that they're going to get back into the win column, and on the other side too, for Green Bay's offense, I do worry that with the health of the offensive line, Jordan Love's decision making, that Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, they can maybe get some pressure onto him and force him into a couple of errors. So I'm going to take the Chargers for 300.
I too am taking the Chargers. Unfortunately, I'm only doing 50, partially because I don't want to bet against my team, but also who knows? Like I wouldn't be shocked. And we saw a little bit of last week. Maybe a little bit him, but more A.J. Dillon kind of get going. And if there's a weakness to the Chargers, it's their run defense. We saw it against Detroit. Now, granted,
in a big way.
Yes, and now granted, obviously Green Bay does not have the line, and probably that Detroit has, or the offense, like you mentioned. That is why I'm going LA at the end of the day. It just feels like because Green Bay offense can't find enough consistency and continuity. Like I've mentioned, a lot of drives. Oh, there's a couple. It's dependent on a big play happening, but then even then, if the big play happens, it's sometimes the next three plays is just incomplete, complete, or just poor results in regards to the offense. And it doesn't help that they're missing a couple of guys, but like we mentioned, injuries are happening everywhere, so no excuse there. And on the flip side, I mentioned no Jair potentially again this week, and so who's really gonna be able to sit Keenan Allen and take him away? I don't know, because it's always mix them up. But our corners right now are Valentine and Ballantyne. Both those guys are backups, literally backups going into this year. Like they were not projected to be starters at all or have like a role. So that kind of says it all. And I've mentioned how the defense, even outside of those two, it's not their fault, just has been underwhelming. Who knows if Quay Walker will even be active too? He missed last week as well. So it seems like the perfect time for the Chargers to take advantage of this, continue to right the ship, while the Packers will see. We'll see what Jordan Love can do, and that's really. I know there's other people to evaluate, but that's really the main one that at least I've been keeping an eye on, because at this point, like I mentioned before, I doubt Packers make the playoffs. So now we got to see what we got to address going to the draft, going to the offseason, and really, if do you build around Love or do we need to move on from him? We'll see what they can do, because this is a Chargers defense that's been had, but obviously Green Bay's offense is nothing to write home about. So
I will say though, there feels like a reasonable pathway to win here, right? Like if they can get the run game going, and although it's harder than I'm about to make it sound, if you can just take away Keenan Allen, you can beat this team. Like no team has really fully taken Keenan Allen away yet. Like he's still usually involved, but I mean, like last week, if the Lions just stopped Keenan Allen, they would have like crushed him because he was the offense. Like there was basically nobody else. Yeah. And so I don't know how the Packers do that. Maybe they got to bracket him every single play. But if you can try and force Quentin Johnston to finally have a breakout game or Jalen Guyton to beat you, like who knows if they can, right? So will it happen? Probably not. But if they can try, then that's how there's a pathway.
Yeah, sorry, just to mention that, to piggyback off that, the only reason why I wouldn't be confident in that really at all, and that's why once again I'm not going Green Bay, is because I just haven't seen that from Joe Burrow. I haven't seen that sort of creativity.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I'm putting 300 on the Chargers.
Yeah, so, and I hear it. That's why. So, we're both going with the Chargers here. Even the Packer fan myself, I'm only putting 50 on the LA Chargers. John is going 300 on them to cover that 2.5 point spread. And I wouldn't be shocked if there are many others that are trying to jump on that one right now. And if that one grows, come Saturday/Sunday. But once again, we're doing this on Wednesday, so it's a good and bad thing sometimes. Sometimes we get the better spreads, and sometimes we don't get great spreads. As the week goes on. But all right, let's go to the last of the noon slate. Let me make sure it is the last. It is okay, and it is the Houston Texans at home. We all know they've been on a little bit of a heater, or at least a couple of big wins the past few weeks. They are at home, favored by 4.5 points, hosting Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals, fresh off their second win of the year, first win this year with Kyler. So yeah, John, very interesting matchup here. Who do you have here, and for how much?
I am gonna go with the Houston Texans, and third game in a row, going big, 300. This is the final one where I'm going huge here. I like what I've seen out of Arizona in the 1 week that Kyler was back, but I just do not have any faith that their defense is going to be able to slow down the Houston offense. Last week, Devin Singletary had a huge game. I think he can be a factor again. We saw, Noah Brown, Dalton Schultz, they've been cooking. CJ Stroud is just absolutely destroying any defense that stands in his way, and I don't really see that changing this week. And I do think that if either defense is going to step up, I'm expecting it more so to be Houston's than to be Arizona's. And so for that reason, I am taking the Texans to win big time with the 300.
All right, so another disagreement for us. I'm going with the Cardinals, but I'm not very confident. I was only going 25. I'm just scared of a little bit of the Kyler Murray factor. You mentioned Houston's defense. I have a little bit less confidence in them overall. Have seen them, against Tampa Bay, an offense that we've mentioned is inconsistent at times, had great success, and the Bengals kind of found their way in the second half against Houston. And it's a whole. Kyler's like a lot of prime Russell Wilson, where it's a whole nother animal to try to contain him. And I know he's still coming off the ACL, second game off, but we saw even last week, that some Kyler-esque, amazing plays where he's just running around and no one can freaking catch him, and then he finally, either takes off and finds a lane or gets the ball out to Trey McBride or whoever else. And I'm not saying that I think Arizona will win. I just think that they keep this game close. I won't be shocked if Houston, especially their defense or overall, just comes a little slow into this one. A couple big weeks, but hey, maybe D'Amico Ryans will keep them on edge. But it just feels like. I just feel like it will be a closer game, and maybe it's only a 10-point game. Houston's in control, and then Arizona scores a late touchdown to just keep it close, kind of a backdoor cover there, and also factoring in that I forget where because I know Kyler initially supposed to go to A&M. Is Kyler's from Texas, right?
Yeah, no, he was a legendary Texas quarterback.
Yeah.
He might arguably be the greatest Texas high school QB of all time. He was setting crazy records in high school.
So
I think he went to Allen. If anyone, just for all the Texas people, I'm pretty sure he went to Allen. I might be wrong on that though.
Okay. Well, regardless, I won't be shocked if that's like a little bit of a boost sometimes, playing in your home state and such. So
no, it is. I'm pretty sure there was a stat for a while that even dated into his time in the NFL that when he played in Texas Stadium in Dallas. He was like undefeated all the way in high school, everything. I don't know about if he's played in in Houston, but like I remember it was a whole big deal like when the last time the Cowboys played the Cardinals is that he had never lost in that stadium, and I'm pretty sure they beat us. So
unfortunate they kept that alive, but so we'll see.
Yeah.
If how much of that buff will happen. Obviously, another week for him too. How will he? Because last week threw an interception. It wasn't like the best passing day from him, but still really good. Was enough to get the job done. So we'll see how he looks.
Also,
there.
I will say too, his family's probably all going to be at the game because you come to Texas. I mean, I know his family's all here, so they'd probably all be there.
Yeah, and you can definitely afford to. I'm sure that they'll have some tickets set aside for Kyler and his family. So we'll see. I'm sure they'll be probably telegraphed on the not telegraph, showing on the TV a couple times as they usually do with the broadcasts. But so another disagreement for us, potentially the biggest swing disagreement, as John is going 300 on the Houston Texans, while I'm only going 25 on the Arizona Cardinals. So huge swing there. Let's go over to the afternoon games on Sunday, starting with the San Francisco 49ers. They are at home. They are favored by 11.5 points, hosting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield, fresh off their win against Tennessee. Both the teams fresh off wins. So who do you have here, John, and for how much?
I'm going with the Niners. I'm only going to put 90. The 11.5 feels a little bit big. I do think that the Buccaneers offense might be able to get some things done in terms of making some stuff happen through the air. I don't expect it to be consistent, but Mike Evans has just been really good. Cade Otton's had a solid season. And, of course, Chris Godwin's still there. Not having the most, fireworks type of year, but it's decent, right? So I think they might be able to get some things done. I do expect the Niners to eventually edge it out in the end, which is why I'm taking them. But that said, I was going to put the standard 100 here, but I needed the 10 points elsewhere, so I ended up putting 90. That's kind of just what I had left over. So I believe in the Niners. I just think that maybe like the first half, this could be one of those games, right, where we're coming out of it and it's like a 3-point game and then they pull away in the second half.
Yeah, I'm kind of following that mantra as I'm going with Tampa Bay for 25. I think that we've seen the last couple of San Francisco losses the week before that when you stop the run, life gets a little bit harder on Brock Purdy and that offense. And obviously Tampa Bay, not what they used to be in regards to run defense, but still have the same similar personnel and style with Vita Vea and such. And I think that they'll be able to slow down San Francisco. And I think in regards to the flip side, San Francisco defense versus Tampa Bay offense, we've seen with Minnesota and some of the other losses, like if teams, you have to be willing to challenge their corners on the outside because they do tend to leave them kind of on islands, and such outside of the hashes. And you mentioned Mike Evans having a great year, and Baker hasn't been afraid to let it rip for him. And hopefully Cade Otton and Chris Godwin can contribute too. I still think San Francisco wins this one just because with Tampa Bay, and it was an issue in the Houston game, especially, was they do tend to be overly aggressive to stop the run, and that leaves their guys in compromisable situations. And you and I both know that Kyle Shanahan, that's what he sets up. He's setting everything up for the play action to beat you deep, and it just feels like there probably will be a couple of plays that Tampa Bay will fall into that trap, their defense, and something will happen. Hopefully not too much for me, but yeah, 11.5 is a lot. I just wouldn't be shocked too here if it's 27-10 and they score a garbage time touchdown or something to keep it close. But our third disagreement here, not going to be a huge difference, as John putting 90 on the San Francisco 49ers, while I'm only going 25 on Tampa Bay. Once again, it's 11.5 point spread, so pretty big one. We'll see if the Niners will cover and win, or maybe Tampa Bay has a trick up its sleeve. Who knows? So let us move over to the NFC West. NFC West matchup, because we already started with San Francisco. We're going with a couple of their division rivals here. It is the Seattle Seahawks. They are favored by 1.5 points going to LA to play the LA Rams. So once again, Seattle, 1.5 point favorites over the LA Rams at LA. John, who do you have here between these two?
I am going with the Seattle Seahawks. Going to put the standard 100 here. The Rams are coming off their bye, but Stafford dealing with the injury. Kyron Williams, I don't think he's coming back till next week.
Correct.
So I don't know. I just think that Seattle, I think they're better than the Rams, which, Vegas agrees considering the Rams have home field advantage. But that 1.5 just feels low to me. I think that Seattle can get some stuff going here and can come out with the win. Just considering the running back situation, considering Stafford might still, I don't know what he's fully looking like with the injury, but, I expect him to play through it regardless because Stafford's a tough guy. But yeah, I just feel like Seattle, they're going to keep up with their winning ways here. So I'm going with them.
Yeah, once again, it's per ESPN. He's not on the injury report, and they even put like Puka Nakua's, he had a little, I guess, knee flare up or something, but he's only still questionable. So looking like Stafford will play. You're right on Kyron Williams, and I know that just because I have him in our dynasty league. But in regards to the game itself, I'm going with the Rams. This was one of those kind of gut feelings. You mentioned they're coming off a bye week. Seattle's kind of had to gut out some games, and we've mentioned that their offense has stalled at times, especially in the red zone, because they are not great at tying plays together. It's kind of just, it's kind of just like the ask man thing. Just whatever plays to kind of pop up to mind, they do. There's not a lot of rhyme and reason in setting things up. While LA Rams, I just feel like, especially with Stafford, a little bit healthier, and once again off the injury report, still have Cooper Kupp. And Seattle's another team, a little bit old school, kind of like Tampa Bay, where they do tend to overplay the run and be overly aggressive, and especially with a guy like Stafford who knows where to get the ball out, and especially with Kupp, we know their connection. I got a feeling that LA Rams, they're going to kind of pull off the upset here. We've seen Seattle fall asleep at the wheel. They hit week 1. Remember this, the Rams came in and beat them week 1, and I know that was a long time ago. Both teams are different from then as they are now, but I got a feeling that the Rams are going to be able to, it's a division foe. I think they have good familiarity with what they want to do, especially on the offensive side of the ball, in terms of like Rams defense for Seattle offense. So, I'm going with the LA Rams for 50. Once again, not super confident because, Seattle does have good talent and, like you mentioned, is the more talented team. But, as we've seen, like I said, week 1, I'm sorry, just because I keep mentioning that because it was a memory that was burned into me forever because I was like, that's how my year started, was betting big on the Seahawks over the Rams, and it didn't go that way. So you can call it a spite, a spite going against them here. But I just got, like I said, going with the gut feeling here with the Rams for 50. And while John is putting 100 on the Seahawks to cover that 1.5 points. So it'll be interesting to see, if the Seahawks can bounce back and get revenge for week 1 and kind of keep climbing those playoff standings. Or if the Rams win, they're kind of right back in that conversation and pulling Seattle kind of into that muck of the wild card race. I mean, Seattle's already kind of there because San Fran's in the lead, but I forget the standings. Maybe Seattle's technically in the lead. Let me see, Seattle 6-3. I don't know off the top of my head, but nonetheless, another difference for John and myself. So we'll see who comes out top in that NFC West matchup. Let's go to the last but not least game of the Sunday afternoon slot. And it's an AFC East divisional matchup between the Buffalo Bills at Buffalo with new offensive coordinator Joe Brady, as Ken Dorsey was let go. Bills are favored by 6.5 points, hosting the New York Jets. Jets are the underdog. Who do you have here, John, between the Jets and Bills?
I'm going with the Jets. I'm only putting 10. I think that Buffalo, they're having some issues, but I still believe they are a team that is capable of just dropping the hammer on basically anybody they play if they catch fire in those moments. We saw that when they played Miami, right? So that's what I worry about. I'm not saying that's going to happen because obviously I'm taking the Jets here, but that worries me. And for the Jets, of course, although I expect Breece Hall to have success here, I worry that maybe it's not enough to fully separate. And so for that reason, I'm only putting the 10. I do expect the Jets to be competitive here, and I could even see a world where they win. But once again, the old saying, it's tough to beat the same team twice. Remember, they beat them in week 1, and I think Josh Allen's going to be hearing a lot of the criticism and want to bounce back this week. So that's why I'm only putting the 10. Plus, once again, I had 4 big games that I put a lot of my points on. So
Yeah, but other games you're more confident. Exactly. So, because I'm a little more confident than you, but people are keeping track of their calculator for some reason on my bets. I do have 300 left. I'm only putting 100 on this game, standard bet. I'm going with the Jets. Many of the reasons you mentioned, although they got the best in week 1. Important to remember, like Zach Wilson was not expected to play week 1. Obviously, the whole Rodgers thing happened. I know it's been a bumpy couple of weeks, but I feel like he'll be definitely more prepared this week. Jets offense apparently also had players only meeting, so I think they'll keep this close. I'm not sure if they'll win, but I think they can keep it close. I think also getting Garrett Wilson and going as well, because there's no one really for Buffalo that I think can stick with a man-to-man, and Buffalo likes to play a lot of zone anyway. But that does scare me for Zach Wilson because he does tend to get fooled by zones and such. But then on the flip side, we saw even the last meeting, this Jets defense, they can hang with the Buffalo offense, and I'm not really sure how changing to Joe Brady will change this offense very much. Maybe I wouldn't be shocked though if maybe it's just more emphasis on taking care of the ball, maybe run the ball too. Who knows? But I don't think it'll be a major jump for Buffalo. I still think they win. So yes, I'm throwing the needle here kind of as well by putting 100 on the Jets, while John is putting 10 on the New York Jets to keep it within 6, as the spread, is 6.5 points favoring Buffalo. So we'll see if the Bills can bounce back, get back on track, or if the Jets can kind of keep this thing alive until Rodgers shows up, if he does. So because we still don't know for sure. But those are the Sunday day games. Let's go to the Sunday night game. While may not have a lot of stardom here, or current stardom, still looking like it could be one of the more exciting games, as it is the Denver Broncos at home at Mile High. They are favored by 2.5 points, hosting the Minnesota Vikings and Josh Dobbs and the gang. They've been one of literally the hottest team in the NFL with I believe that's 6 straight, or is it 5 straight? Regardless, they have the longest active win streak right now.
That's 5.
5. Okay, I'm jumping the gun at 6. But nonetheless,
could be though.
They could. As I mentioned, Denver favored by 2.5 over the Vikings. John, who do you have here between these two teams?
Well, I'm saying it goes 6 straight. I'm taking the Vikings here. I like what I've seen out of Denver. That said, I also like what I've seen out of Minnesota. And I think that Danielle Hunter could be a game changer here. I think he could get a lot of pressure on Russell Wilson. The Broncos offense has not necessarily been super inspiring. They do get the job done, but they're doing it in games where they're able to hold the opposing offense to not a lot of points. Like they can keep it within, each team scoring around 17, 21 point range, then that's where we're seeing Denver, have these strong wins. But I think at some point, the wheels are going to come off. And I think that, for Minnesota, they've just been looking really good, man. Like, I don't know how Denver's going to go out there and stop TJ Hawkinson specifically, because, one of my big critiques of Denver for a long time has just been the lack of solid linebacker play. Not that their linebackers are terrible, but they don't really have a premier linebacker that I feel like can match up with Hawkinson, and so you're going to have to rely on safeties. But, I mean, Kareem Jackson's have a very turbulent year, and he was kind of the guy that you would expect to cover tight ends. So, I don't know, like... It'll be an interesting week for sure. I could see, honestly, this one go either way, but maybe I'm just sipping the Josh Dobbs Kool-Aid, but I'm going with Minnesota. That said, if you're talking about people doing the calculator, I don't have any points left over, so I'm only putting 10.
Yeah, money's run short for you. That's okay. I'm going the opposite way, so another disagreement for us. I'm going with Denver. I just feel like they've sort of they're starting to find their identity, find their formula. Russell Wilson's gaining confidence, and it seems like Sean, like I mentioned last episode, Sean Payton's it seems like he's found ways to manage Russell Wilson, see what works for him, and put him in success, and then playing complementary football on the back end with the defense. Their defense has been better in the past few weeks overall, and I would expect they have a game plan, to contain Josh Dobbs, make him beat him within the pocket, and see if he can do so, which is still scary because he still has a really good connection with Hawkinson, as we saw last week, and Jordan Addison's still there, is still pretty good. But the fact that that they're Minnesota might be one dimensional on offense. I feel like helps Denver. Although I am scared, and it'll be an interesting matchup. Sean Payton and his play calling on offense, how he will try to just him going up against Brian Flores and the Minnesota defense that we've been mentioning has just been out. Everyone's talking about Josh Dobbs and deservedly so, but Minnesota's defense has been kind of overperforming from what we've expected as well with Brian Flores, and he always has a good and interesting plan of attack depending on the team too.
I mean, just talking about the defense, Danielle Hunter, I just want to throw this out there because I don't feel the guy's getting enough respect. If there's anybody that's, in that Defensive Player of the Year race right now that's not being talked about enough, it's Danielle Hunter. Obviously, everybody's talking about Micah Parsons and TJ Watt and Myles Garrett, but Danielle Hunter, I think he leads the league in sacks right now. He's going crazy.
Yeah, so, and obviously he's been a very good pass rusher for, the past couple of years. It's not like, it's a fluke year or anything. It'll be a very interesting matchup nonetheless between these two teams because both of them kind of been on a little bit of hot streak recently, but also because of early season struggles, they're kind of in survival mode in regards to they have to really get these type of wins here against teams that are equal to them before they inevitably play some of the tougher teams as they try to make it into the playoffs. So we'll see who comes out on top there for Sunday nights. But let's go over lastly and finally to the Monday night game, which, as I mentioned, this is probably one of the, if not the best, one of the better matchups we have for the year, as it is a Super Bowl rematch we got on Monday night. It is Kansas City at Kansas City, favored by 2.5 points, hosting the Philadelphia Eagles. If I remember correctly, both teams coming off a bye, so that is also an interesting factor here. But John, who do you have between these two, and for how much?
I'm going to go with the Eagles, and similar to the last few games, I only got 10 points left over, so I'm only putting 10. I don't feel strongly either way. I think that the Eagles' defense certainly can be had, so I do expect Mahomes to have a solid outing. That said, they don't have a lot of premier receivers, so you can kind of focus a lot of your attention on Kelsey. Now, that's easier said than done. So I don't know. And then on the other side, Kansas City's defense has been really good, and I think they can certainly frustrate Philly, but at the same time, Philly is somewhat similar to San Francisco in the fact that they're one of those few teams, Detroit, another one where you believe in that offensive line so much that even against premier defenses, you could see a world where they just say, you know what, we're just going to run it down your throat, and it works, right? So I don't feel strongly either way. Obviously, as a Cowboys fan, I'd love for Kansas City to come out here and get the win and prove me wrong, but I'm taking Philly, and like I said, with the only remaining points I have, it is 10.
All right, well, we are ending on a disagreement as I'm going with Kansas City for 100. I think Philly's offense, while it is extremely talented, schematically taking a step back from last year. I think we've kind of seen that at times. And Kansas City defense, it's one of the younger defenses. We just saw them in the Super Bowl. They were the only ones to, everyone credits this year, but they're the only ones to really stop Philly in the run game and slow them down. And if I remember correctly, they did stop a tush push without them messing up the exchange. So I think Kansas City matched up well on that side, and I think their defense will be able to slow down Philadelphia. And on the flip side, we've mentioned Philly's secondary definitely has taken a step back, just talent wise, as opposed from this year to the Super Bowl matchup. And although Kansas City's receiving core has also kind of taken a step back, I'm kind of banking in on the fact right now that it's an Andy Reid bye week, and I would expect Mahomes and them to have just some answers and some confidence plays and just some ways to get their young receivers going, expose that secondary, and kind of and neutralize that amazing defensive line of Philadelphia, because Kansas City too. They don't have Orlando Brown, and Donovan Smith has been a downgrade to say the least from Orlando Brown Jr. at left tackle, so that could be an issue for Mahomes and the gang. But it'll be a fun one nonetheless. But I just have a little more confidence in Kansas City, as I'm only going the standard bet of 100 on them, while John is going with the Eagles for 10, the minimum, as that's all I had left over. So, it should be a fun Monday night, an exciting one. And those are our picks and bets against the spread for Week 11 of the NFL season. Anything else you wanted to notate or add before we call it there?
I mean, that Cowboys game is going to be an interesting one. Same thing as last week, right? If the Cowboys don't do it, then it could be a little bit of a rough week for you. But if they do, which I think they should, you could be back in the positive ways. I'm liking the strategy you got going right now.
Yeah, I just gotta, just a little bit of finding out who you have faith in. And I had a little trouble for a bit, and hopefully I can keep this hot streak. But so that'll do it for us in regards to that. And just side note too, before we call it, I mean, we are going up against each other in one of our dynasty leagues, technically for the next, hopefully, we'll see. It's a best of 3 for the next 3 weeks. For
Survivor Series.
It's like basically Survivor. It is a Survivor Series / I like to think of it as also like our version of like an in-season tournament. So we'll see. John and I are last, so it's just
for anyone who doesn't know what that means too. We're not like actually our teams aren't playing against each other. What's happening is the whole season, the lowest scorer each week got eliminated, and we are the final 2 teams left. And so instead of just doing better score 1 week wins, over the next 3 weeks we will have our scores added together, and then we will see who wins. And yes. I mean, you have the best team in the league on the season, but I think my team has kind of surged recently. I think I have 3 straight weeks as the highest scorer. So I'm really hoping that now all of a sudden the moment I hit the finals that they don't cool off, because that would kind of suck.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens between the both of us there. So not only going up against each other in regards to the spreads, but also this week, once again, not technically head to head, but in terms of that, yes, we are going up. Hey, there's money on the line, so I'm honestly taking that more serious than my head-to-head matchup. Although it is what it is, and I'm actually playing I think the worst person in the league this week, so I should win regardless. But so we'll see how our first week there goes, and obviously we'll see how these picks and bets go for us. As once again, John still ahead in that, but we'll see if I can catch up there, and we'll see if John can win and beat me in the in-season tournaments, and then make the playoff race more fun there. But nonetheless, as always, feel free to rate, review, and comment and such if you'd like. But other than that will do it for John and myself. We will be back next week, obviously, to react to week 11 and then share our picks. That'll do it.